Hi again. All right. Great seeing you all again. And hi, I have noticed a few new faces. My name is Mazdak, in case you do not know me. I finished my PhD just exactly a year ago, I think, here at UT. And Tamer asked me to talk about social network analysis. In most of my previous presentations, I talked about the general of the research, which had two sides, social and semantic. As most of you guys are experts in semantics, I think that's why he's asking me to give a presentation on social network analysis. So today I'm taking you to the behind the scene of what's happening in the social network analysis, SNA. I'm going to start with what is familiar to most of you. Any of you who has been in any of my presentations before have noticed these two charts, the graph and then the way that we bisect or dissect the graph into its clusters. I want to show how this thing happens. So starting from the data collection, that guy over here is an expert in data collection. His name is Harry Konami, in case you do not know him. Any question about how you collect data on Twitter, Facebook, any other platform, I direct it to him. We have talked about this before. You start with focusing on a few projects that you want to study. In my case, I focused on a few Canadian and other North American projects in different sectors and subsectors of infrastructure. All of these projects had Twitter accounts. If you want to study Facebook account, YouTube channel, or anything else, that's still doable. I'm not going there. I'm just going to show how to make the hot dog. I want to show the dirty side of coming up with those networks and then how much effort it takes to come up with the analytics, which I always presented. So keep in mind, these are the projects. You have seen the results before. In case you missed them, go watch the video on YouTube. But basically, I want to show what happens in the social network side. Before starting, social network, the network means a graph. We're talking about the graph, a few nodes, a few edges. And any graph in which the nodes are social identities and the edges are social connections is called social network. So basically, that's the definition of social network. So we're talking about the graph. Basically, I want to show the behavior of these graphs because they are representative of live phenomena. And then I'm going to show you some mathematical algorithms which help us come up with analytics in these graphs. Starting with basic properties of social networks. But whenever you want to study any type of network, these are the three major things you want to consider the behavior, general behavior of these graphs. These are the major three things to ask yourself. What is the degree distribution? What is the diameter? And what is the clustering behavior? And by diameter, I don't mean what is the number that comes out of the diameter analysis. I mean, how is diameter behaving? How is the degree distribution behaving? And how is the clustering behavior? I will talk about these three things in the coming slides. Let's say last thing first, this is the behavior of social network analysis in terms of those three measures that I just explained. The degree distribution of social networks follows a parallel degree distribution. I will talk about that in a second. The diameter, let's talk about the definition of diameter. So I have a graph. And if I want to measure the distance between any of the two nodes, I have to count number of steps that it takes me to reach from one node to the other one. If I want to go from this node to this node, it takes me just one step. If I want to go from this node, let's say over here, to this node over here, there might be multiple steps. We're looking for the smallest, the shortest step. Now, among all the shortest paths between any two nodes, the largest one is the diameter. In other words, it's the furthest that two nodes in a graph are positioned from each other. So I am connected to Rodrigo with one step. Rodrigo is connected to Abdulrahman with one step. So if I want to reach him, it takes me two steps because I am not connected to him directly. The distance between me and Abdulrahman is 2, even though I might know Made might know Harry, and Harry might know Abdulrahman. 3 and 2, 2 is the distance between the two of us. Among all of us, the longest of this shortest path is called the diameter. And there is like clustering behavior. It's talking about what portion of my friends know each other. How many of my friends are connected to each other. So that's simply the meaning of clustering. And it gives rise to the fact that how clustered a network is, how closely groups of people are connected to each other in a network. So these three things are what we want to study. Now, most cases when you want to study the behavior of a network, they compare it versus random graphs. And a random graph is a graph which is generated randomly. You just pick two numbers, n, which is number of nodes, and a p, which is a probability. So you pick n, let's say 10, you pick 10 nodes, and then you assign a probability of with what probability each of these nodes will be connected to other nodes in this graph. It's created second shot, third shot. Each time that you run, you come up with a different layout of the graph. But all of these have the probability of 6 and have 10 nodes, right? So why did I show it to you? The Erdős-Rényi network is normally the measure to compare behavior of any network versus this. Because whatever comes out of it is pure random. You want to see how social networks behave differently from these networks. How pipeline network behaves differently from this random network. Whatever pops in difference is essential for that type of phenomenon that you study. Let me move on. I want to start with the first concept, which most of you must probably have heard of, which is small world. Who's not heard of small world phenomenon? Okay, this thing started with Milgram. Basically, social network studies started somehow from Milgram study. He picked 300 people in Omaha, I think, and gave them a letter, asked them to pass it to their friends, so that the letter ends up in Chicago, I think, with a stockbroker. So there was an address put down on that letter. I was given the letter, and I was asked to give it to a friend of mine, and a friend of mine will give it to a friend of him or her. And at the end of the day, it wanted to find its way to that stockbroker. So if I receive that letter, I would think, who might have connections in Chicago? So I go to Harry and say, do you know anybody? He's like, I don't know, I take care of it. That was the study. 300 people. At the end of the day, 64 letters were received by the guy in Boston. Yeah, in Boston. The guy, the mortgage broker was, the stockbroker was in Boston. The interesting thing in this study was the distribution of number of chains. How many times the letter was passed to another person so that it got to the guy in the Boston. And as you see, this is the distribution, different numbers. But the mean of this distribution was 6.2. So on average, it takes 6 two-point chains between me and some completely random guy that I do not know. And the idea came from here. It's called 6 degrees of separation, if you've heard of it, which says any two people in the world are, on average, connected with each other with six steps. So I am connected to Barack Obama with 6 steps, right? I am at the same time connected to Osama bin Laden with 6 steps, right? This is a little bit scary, anyway. This experience was repeated later on in other experiences. It was again tested in email network. And the number that this time people got was 7. Millions of nodes were involved here. Then later on, over and over again over the history, 6.6. Well, we ended up finding out that what Milgram did was not completely right. But if it's not 6, it's 7. If it's not 7, it's 6.7. It's something in that range, which is thought-provoking because, okay, billions of people in the world, and they're all connected with each other with such a short distance. I personally believe, if I do not know social network analysis, I expect the diameter of social network in the globe to be something like 100,000 chains, but it's not. It's just single digits. This phenomenon is called small world. So the question was, all right, we do have such a network, which is a small word. What is the exact behavior of such a network? That's a friend of mine. So they started testing, coming up with mathematical models, and what we ended up understanding is the fact that the social networks are pretty clustered. There are many people who are densely connected with each other, opposed to the random graph in which nodes are distributed. See, you do see clusters over here. You do not see such clusters over here. And that's why such a network is a small word. You know somebody from here, and there's a good chance that this person is connected to a completely different part of the network. The random networks, and the other side, the small word networks, and this is the regular network. So look at the three, and I want to hide the. All right. Look at the shapes. And the one side I have a complete random, and the other side I have a complete regular graph. And in between I have my small word. Few of the links are missing here and are connected to other far sides of the network, and that's what is giving rise to small word behavior. These two parameters control this behavior. One of them is the diameter, the other one is clustering. So if you have low diameter and low clustering, it's a random graph. Anybody is connected to anybody else, but it's completely random. It's not clustered that much. On the other side, I have regular network. If you look at the diameter of this network, if you want to reach from this guy to this guy, it takes all of these people, right? So it has a huge diameter, and at the same time, it has huge clustering. Another measure which controls clustering is how many triangles you have in your network. Because if I have a friend of mine, and if these two are connected, we three form a triangle, right? So clustering is controlled pictorially from our triangles. As you see, there are many triangles here, but these triangles are so regular, are so ordered that it does not give rise to a small diameter. On the other side, no triangle, and but a small diameter. In between, we have these folks. This is the behavior that we get in small network, in small word networks. We have many clusters, as you see, many triangles, and each node is randomly connected to other nodes from the furthest part of the network. So think of yourself, you are densely connected to people in U of T, but at the same time you have connections to people from your high school, you have connections from people back home, connections from people to the church, here and there, your football team or whatever. So I am connected to you, which connects me indirectly to someone in China, to someone in Egypt, to someone in Saudi, something anywhere, right? That's basically the random word, the small word. What did we find in our networks? So I more specifically focus on the 4 projects in North America, LRT projects, and I want to show you how we measure these measures in our networks. So basically, I want to draw your attention to here. These are basically the instance parameters, not of the interest here. So as you see, the diameter, the middle one, that we found in our networks of a couple of thousand nodes were something around 5, 6, 10, between 5 and 10. So we do have small diameters. On the other side, the clustering, as you see, is always less than half, which is a good clustering. So that was the first step to confirm that any social network formed around the project is a small word. For those of you who were not in the previous presentations of mine, here's the whole idea. There's a project being built here. People who have interest in that project start following that project over YouTube, over Facebook, or wherever else. And these people are at the same time connected to each other. So they form a network which is formed around that technical issue. And we're studying those networks. What you see here is in the networks that we studied, we did confirm that these type of networks are a small word. The next thing which must be studied is the formation of social networks. I want to talk about the parallel degree distributions I just mentioned, scale-free networks, and long tail. So small word justify the diameter and clustering behavior in social networks. On the other side, we have the degree distribution, the third important thing to be looked at. And the question to be answered is, what fraction of people have a degree of K? So for example, how many people in the globe have 100 friends on Facebook? How many have 101? How many have 102, 103, and so on and so forth? So I can have a horizontal axis which shows these numbers, the integers, 1, 2, 3, up to billions, and how many people have only one friend in Facebook, 2, 3, 4, 5. It gives me a distribution. We want to study that as a distribution. Parallel distribution is the distribution which applies to any phenomenon in which popularity matters. Any phenomenon in which there are a few people, a few nodes, a few things which are super popular, and there are tons of people knows things which are not quite popular. It's opposed to the normal distribution, which justifies the behavior of random networks. So a good example to understand what's the difference is comparing the highway network in the United States versus the flight connections in the United States. This one is a parallel, this one is a normal distribution. Because popularity does not matter here, really. It's something man-made. It's designed and envisioned by an engineer, a few engineers over time. But this one is kind of self-organized. There are a few hubs, there are a few airports which are hot. People are interested in traveling to New York, but not as much interested in traveling to Mississippi, for example, right? So this means that the airport that you have in New York is a lot busier and a lot more popular than the regional airport that you have somewhere else. So this, and do you see the difference? Social networks look like this. They do not look like this. And parallel is everywhere, basically everywhere. Wealth distribution. A few bloodsuckers. I do not like that. I am a capitalist myself. So a few people who have a huge amount of fund, and then lots of people who are living on they just expenses. Scientific outputs. Few people contribute to the most of the body of the knowledge in the world. Lots of people like us just publish one of the papers over our lives. Word frequency. There are a few words that you use a lot. There are many words that you might use only once or twice in an article or all along your life. Population of cities. A few cities in Canada with millions of people living. So think about anything, and if you think of any of these examples, popularity is involved in one form or other, right? So a few examples: emails, cities, fires, earthquakes, these type of things. Now, any network which is following this behavior is called a scale-free network. And the reason is twofold. First of all, for the mathematical the distribution, which is scale-free, and second, from the concept. Because any network which is following parallel distribution, regardless of in one domain it is showing the same behavior, many similar behaviors. That's why many strategies, many marketing strategies can be taken from one domain and be applied to other domain, and it still works. Now the next question is, do we have such a behavior in our networks, yes or no? But before that, let me explain the long tail as well, because that's another thing that you might need to know if you want to work, whenever you're doomed to work in social network analysis. So this is the parallel distribution. And exploring this distribution started a whole new dialogue in strategizing your businesses. So for example, let's say you want to launch a new website which sells music. There are tons and tons of musics which are not listened that often. Most perhaps, if you want to buy those and broadcast them on your website, you do not need to pay that much, right? The copyright is not that much. But you need a huge database to store them. On the other side, you can just save on your database, buy a few music, a few albums which are pretty popular, and save on the database, spend more on the copyright, and both of these two, like in this example, if this area is the same as this area, you will have the same income. So it's a matter of your decision that you want to be this side, you want to be that side, unless you are Spotify, which covers the whole thing. Does this make sense? So this long tail is a group of losers, I call people who are like things which are not that popular, but because it's long, it has a considerable area under it. So you cannot ignore these people. This is why democracy works. There are lots of people who do not have power, but because there's lots of them, you have to satisfy them one way or other. What? Okay. I'm not sure why this has happened, but yeah, mathematics of these networks. I would be happy to chat about these things. But what I wanted to mention, so basically what we have is such a formula, and this alpha is what controls the parameter. It controls the distribution. The alpha parameter in most of the networks, the real networks which are studied, is around 2, as you see. It's around 2. It's between 2 and 3. If you look at the distribution, you can mathematically prove that alpha cannot be below 2, cannot be above 3. Mathematically impossible. And when we go through the actual networks, LinkedIn is studied, Facebook was studied at some point, many networks, social networks are studied, and at the end of the day, as you see, the numbers do lie between 2 and 3, even though you can always form a random social network which does not have an alpha between 2 and 3. This is a good notion of whether or not your social network is mature. So you start a new website, some people start following and registering. How do I know whether or not I have a reliable social network which the analytics coming out of it are meaningful? One of the things that you need to do is to derive the distribution, calculate alpha, and see if it's between 2 and 3, you have a quite reliable network. What did we find? In the 4 networks that I just showed to you, all of them were following the parallel degree distribution, and alpha was about 2. Not exactly between 2 and 3. So if you look at this network, this project was a project in the late phases of construction. And as you see, alpha is 2.1, so it's a very well-established network. Pre-construction, pre-planning, this was in planning basically. Planning, pre-construction, early construction. And as you see, as you move on in the phases of construction, the social network around it becomes more and more mature. It settles somehow, right? So if you're in very early phases of your, just announced your project, online or offline, whatever, this random group of people who are following it might not be a social network. Our social network, as I said, only 2 people who are connected form a social network. But the social network, the analytics which come out of it might not be that reliable. You cannot not make decision based on analysis of such network. The next thing, coming from July of 2012, is the evolution of networks. There are 2 aspects of network evolution that you must consider when you study social networks. The question is, okay, I have a network, see the people, it just reached the alpha around 2, so it's mature. What happens from here on? How does this network evolve over time? And this question can be answered at 2 different levels, the macroscopic and microscopic, which is missing for some reason. So at the macro level, you look at how this network evolves as one thing. How does the diameter grow? How do analytics of this network change over time? Basically, that's the macro. Microscopic level is more of interest of people in sociology, in computer science. They want to see how people behave, which gives rise to that macro level. So if I found out that all networks grow in diameter, right? Why? What is giving rise? What behavior between Rodrigo and I gives rise to grow in the diameter? So that's the difference between the 2. What matters to us is macroscopic level. And again, the most important thing is how does this network change its behavior in terms of number of nodes, in terms of number of connections. I expect that more people join if it's still a hot project or it's still a hot topic. And adding more people means adding more connections. But how do these 2 numbers change proportional to each other? Well, the first thing that I can predict is the 2 are growing hand in hand and proportionally. Adding 100 new people means adding 100 new nodes, which is not the case. Because adding 100 new people means adding 100 new connections to the project, but many people here in the existing network know those newcomers, so many new connections will be formed. So that was the first thing. The second thing is how does
the diameter change over time. Adding new people, I expect to be synonym to growing and having a larger network. Does this make sense? I start my project in the beginning. If I go and work out the diameter of this network, I come up with 10. After 5 days, I expect this 10 to be growing to 11, 12, 100, 1,000, a million. Is that the case? No, that's not the case. The second weird thing that is monitored in these types of networks is the fact that as time passes, the diameter shrinks. So these networks shrink as they grow, as they expand. That's one of the weirdest behavior in social networks. When I had only 100 followers, the diameter of this network was 9. Now that I have 1 million followers, the diameter of this network is 6. Why? Because many people are connected with each other, form the triangles, many of those random paths are formed, and these networks shrink over time. So, let me skip these. I want to show you what happened in our study. Did we manage to confirm these things? In order to confirm those type of behavior, we had to monitor one network over time. So when you study one network over like 16 months, what we found, which was different from general social network, was the diameter in our networks are not necessarily shrinking, at least in the limited scope that we studied. 2 years is not a huge window. We only studied for 2 years. We had to study for 100 years to see how the diameter changes. So basic diameter oscillates in our networks. I could not find a pattern for by diameters. But what we found was the communities of these networks get denser and denser. What does that mean? I am starting a new project. There are people with different types of interest in that project. People who are interested because they want to ride this new train. People who are interested because they're paying tax. People who are interested because they want to move to that city. Each of these folks form their own communities. As time goes on, as time moves, pretty rapidly, each of these clusters become denser and denser. That's what we found. And in order to confirm that, we had to look at another measure called modularity, which I'll explain in the upcoming part of the presentation. So at that point, we thought it might be a good time to come up with a model for these types of networks, the networks that we have. Infrastructure discussion networks, IDNs. What is it? What's the model for them? In order to answer that question, we need to look at diffusion and cascading. The diffusion behavior, which initially comes from biological networks, talks about the diseases, how diseases propagate in a network. But you can find them in other things as well. Technological networks, when a new technology pops, how fast and how do other competitors start to take it? How does this spread? In social networks, rumor is a good thing, or news is a good thing. You start violating a node, which means I start to convince Rodrigo about this rumor that Tamer El-Durabi has moved to the University of New York, that's why he's not here, right? And then what happens? 10 days later, I might hear the same news from somebody completely random. How did that rumor spread over time, right? So, in business, viral marketing, you start to convince one person to buy the product and you stay aside, he or she will do the job and it will diffuse. That's the diffusion. And how about cascading? What is cascading? Cascading is the furthest that this rumor can go. If next day I get a call from Apple who says, have you heard the news that Tamer has moved to New York? I would say, no, I haven't heard that and I don't want to hear that again. Why? So I will not be violated. It's not the fact that anybody who hears that rumor will be violated. The question is, what is the largest group of people who hear that news and will believe in it? In our context, if I want to justify that I want to move to P3 for this project, and I want to plant the seed here that P3 is a good model for running this project, what is the largest number of people who will believe in that and who will support this idea later on? I might be a counselor, city councilor who's going for that. So here's the story. You start in a network, you start by affecting a node. So this node is diseased now. This node is in contact with two other nodes, which can make them sick at the same time, but those nodes are in turn connected to other nodes. Some of the nodes might be vaccinated, so that's me. And this grows, so that guy rejects any time that he or she receives the news or the contagious. And this is the furthest that you can go. So out of that network, the largest tree, which is influenced and affected, is some specific thing. That is called cascade. Cascade as a result of diffusion. So we have the infection or behavior or virus as the thing that the plant, the seed that you plant, depending on the context. Then we have adoption. If people, there's a difference between contagion and adoption. If we're talking about things like disease, you do not make a decision whether or not I want to get sick. But if you talk about rumors or supporting or opposing the P3, that's a decision to be made. And the interesting part is when I want to make the decision that whether or not P3 is good for this project, I rely not only on my knowledge of the previous projects, so on and so forth, also look at the behavior of other people that I know. If Rodrigo is supporting it, I hate him that much that I say, no, I do not want to go for P3, for example. Or in reality, the moment he says P3, even though I have never heard of P3, I believe in him and I say, yeah, I am supportive. So that's another network behavior. That's adoption. I'm making a decision whether or not I want to be part of that cascade. And also at the end we have infected nodes or adopters or active nodes, those ones who are within the cascade. So again, decision-based model and probabilistic model. The second one is for diseases type of thing. The first one is for adopting a behavior. So in decision-based model of diffusion and cascade, nodes observe other nodes' behavior and decide whether or not they want to adopt it. Opposed to probabilistic models that nodes who are in contact with the other infected neighbors get infected, no decision involved, by a certain probability. So there are these two models, different terminologies used for different modeling different behaviors. So the question was, what we have in hand, what is the story? So I have the social network, the general social network. It can be all the citizens in the city. In my problem, it was all people who have Twitter accounts. On the other side, I have a project network. Those people who are involved in that project start talking about it, first bring up the idea, who are involved in that project from any aspect, financing, technical aspects, anything, right? So these folks are the ones who get infected at the first step. Then those who are connected to these people start getting in touch with them and understand, hearing about the idea. And this grows over time till you get the cascade. And that is what we call infrastructure discussion network. So I have the whole Twitter account of those counselors, those politicians, or whoever who was talking about that project, and in between I have those people who are connected to them, start following that project and start getting involved. Then we thought that the type of behavior in here is mostly decision-based, and the type of behavior here, if you want to simulate such a network, might be probabilistic. Back then when I was thinking about it, we talked about probabilistic because it's ultimately difficult, if not impossible, to model that as a decision-based model. It's difficult to find out based on what people make decisions, even though we do know that whether or not I want to follow that project is a decision-based model. So maybe 20, 25, 50 years from here, when these decision models are more understood, we can replace that with a decision-based model as well. So this is a good guide for you if you want to simulate these types of networks rather than empirical studies and looking at the actual network. So basically, again, social network of people in a city, you need to, first thing to do is you need to understand your project network, which is most of the time pretty dense, if not a complete graph. And you need to look at the diffusion of the idea over your network and find the cascade of the network. Because not necessarily, again, anybody who is connected will be interested in that project. I am connected to somebody, because some friend of mine, because he's living in Georgia, but I'm not interested in the type of projects that he's following in Georgia, right? The other thing which makes the case even more complex is the fact that the networks that we're dealing with are not homogeneous. They are heterogeneous networks. We basically and essentially have two types of nodes. We have people who are following each other, connected with each other, and we have ideas. People who are following some ideas. Whether or not they are connected to each other, there's a link, there's an invisible link between any two supporter of Toronto Maple Leaf, right? There's a connection because they're sharing the same interests. If I want to look at that network, I have two types of nodes. The ideas discussed about the project and the people interested in that project. What we really want to have is a network which accommodates all the visible and invisible links. So if two people are not followers, direct followers of each other on into it, there must be an invisible link between the two. And it's impossible to work with both. Not impossible, it's mathematically super duper complex to work with such a heterogeneous network. So the trick that we used was we looked at any two people who are sharing the same idea and we connected them through an invisible link. And the weight of the invisible link was, okay, let me talk about the weights as well. These two people are sharing the same interest, they're talking about the same idea. How strongly do they believe in that idea? That's one thing to consider. Second, is it a positive or negative connection? Am I supportive or opposed to that idea? That defines the weight, how strongly you are following an idea. And basically, in order to remove these two links and model it with a social link, you need to read this weight, and calculate somehow the weight between these two people. So as a result, the ideas are removed from the picture. It's all at least homogeneous nodes. But we know that we have heterogeneous edges, but that really does not matter. It doesn't make it super difficult. Why do I need such a network? I need such a network to investigate in two major things. First, who are the important people in this network? Who is the person that I have to listen to? And what are the communities of this network? I overwhelmed you guys with these two things. Here I want to quickly show you how we calculate. I always show you the result, never show you how we calculated these two things. Starting with the influence, we want to investigate and see who are the top influential nodes following this specific project. Because if somebody keeps nagging about the project is not environmentally sound, but has only 2 followers, or has a million followers who are living in, in Mississippi, and we're talking about the project in Toronto, I do not need to listen to him. If I'm making a decision, I do not need to be concerned about him. But if I have somebody with 100 followers, who are all important people with respect to this project, who have high level of power, and he is nagging about the project not being environmentally safe, I have to consider and listen to what he says. So we want to detect that type of thing. There are tons of traditional methods in social network analysis. Our domain is in love with centrality, which is not the best thing to use actually in such a huge network, in large scale networks, whenever you're working with big data, or even mid-scale networks. So we started testing different ones. One of the ones that we tested was hits analysis, hyperlink induced topic search. This method, the beauty of this method is it gives you the important nodes from 2 different aspects. Who are important hubs, who are important authorities, which means who are the main sources of news, who are the ones that whenever they tweet, everybody listens to them, and who are the people who are following these folks, because those might be important as well. You want to know what are the hot topics about this. You might need to go and look at people who are looking at many of these things, like Digs.com. Digs.com is not a huge source of news, but it is following all the huge hubs of news. Is anybody familiar with Digs.com? Okay, forget about that. All right, we have our network. This is the way that the algorithm works. We start by counting and seeing how many followers each of the nodes has. So we give a weight to each of these nodes based on the number of followers. Centrality stops here and says the most important node is this is the most important node. What we need to dig a little bit deeper. It might not be the case. These 4 might be all losers following that node. That's why we need to investigate a little more. So we redistribute these. We do the same thing again. I say this node is following this guy, and this node is following this guy. So this node is 2 units important. This guy is following this guy, and this guy, and this guy. Weight of 2, weight of 2, weight of 4. So this guy is 8 units important, right? So I'm giving a level of importance to the followers as well, right? And I do the same thing. Now, this guy is followed by these 2 folks, 8 and 11, so the new weight of this guy would be 19, right? And we can continue this. We define a stop level, and we stop at that point. This way, we are not taking the quantity into consideration, but also quality into consideration. Not only how many followers this guy has, but how important those followers are, right? So this type of thing gave rise to detecting the top influential nodes in our own networks. Again, this network back then had 500 something followers. It's impossible to me to look at all the 500 followers and whatever they do, whatever they say. I have to look at 20, 25, certain number of people, and those will be the top influential people in my network. Well, then you can represent them with larger nodes, and you're good to go. In my case, these were the top influential nodes concerned about Eglinton Crosstown LRT project. Some of them trivial. Crosstown is the top player in that project. Of course, is a big player. But good luck finding this buddy as an important node. Why is he important? Because he's a blogger, and many important people follow his blog. Why this guy is important? This guy, I think I can't recognize from the face, but I think one of these guys was a freelance planner. But because he was tweeting a lot, many people interested in city planning were listening to him and made him or her an important node. Some of these are city councilors. It's impossible to look at, I don't say it's impossible, but it's misleading if you look at all city councilors who are talking about this project. Out of them all, only a few of them are important nodes. A few of TTC, as you see, people in TTC, a few of them are important. Do you get my point? You're solving a problem with millions of people involved. It's impossible to go and look at the rank of this. It's possible. It's one policy to say, I listen to the person who's at the higher level of this hierarchy. Yeah, that's one. We do not like that. We want to go for self-organizing. I'm not giving more credit to someone because he's working in TTC. I'm giving more credit if more people are listening to him and if he really has a higher level of influence over people. Right? Mayor of Toronto back under I used to joke with him a lot, and I really feel bad now that he passed away. I felt so bad that I went to St. James the day that it was his funeral, because I felt like really bad about making lots of jokes about him. But anyways, well, Mayor of Toronto was important because of being Mayor of Toronto. But why David Miller is not here? David Miller, the mayor before Rob Ford, who was the one who really made this project happen. But he was not here because people are not listening to him anymore, right? So in this case, the rank or the role is more important than the actor. Okay, if that's the case, let people decide. Does it make sense? All right, and it's again impossible to answer, not impossible, it's misleading to answer many of these questions through traditional methods like centrality. So the next thing that we ask ourselves is, can I group these people? Are they coming from different schools? Are there different specific interests that I can detect among these people? In order to answer that question, the last thing that we looked at was community detections. So the question was, I wanted to find those clusters, those groups of people who are densely connected with each other and sparsely connected to other people. Most probably, perhaps it's the 100th time that you're hearing this definition, but you do not remember because you never really cared about that definition. Basically, I'm looking for those clusters, groups of people who are together and have the same interest in the project. Tons of methods. I explained one of the ones which is combinatorial that might be interesting to you. One of the methods that we tested, Harry and I wasted, I think, whether or not you realize you wasted like 2 months of your life on this, and at the end of the day we decided that this is not getting us anywhere because all we could find was 2 clusters One of them was one node, the other one was the rest of the network. It doesn't really work well in our case, at least. None of our cases. I still do not have any explanation why. Basically, this is the way it works. It looks at the bitminness centrality of nodes. Bitminness centrality is a measure of how hot each of these nodes is, which means how many shortest path in this graph passes through each of these nodes. A few of the nodes, I highlight the number of shortest path. See, if you look at this node, there's only one shortest path ending to this node, which is this one. If you want to reach from this point to this point, you have to take this path. If you want to reach from this point to that point, you need to take this path. So this is one of the numbers that 12 contributed to 12. If you look at this path here, any node from this half who wants to get connected to any node from that path must pass through this edge, right? So this edge is a bridge, Now, before moving on, if I take a first look at this graph, I say, okay, I do see one cluster here, one cluster here. So the whole idea comes from finding the bridges, remove them, because you will come up with two important sections in that. So what we do is we count the bitminness centrality for each edge, find the largest one, remove it, come up with clusters. Do the same again. Count again. This time, this 12 is the largest number that I see. The same 12, 12, 12. So cut those. Count again, 1, 1, 1, 1, and you can cut those. We can bisect to the stage that you come up with just nothing but nodes, right? But then you move back and see these are the communities at different levels. At the highest level, I could detect these two communities. One level further, I detected these four communities, and nothing else because the next level is nothing but nodes, right? Two main questions to be answered. How deep should you go? Which of these two is a better set of communities? Does this network have two communities, the red ones, or four communities, the yellow ones? In order to answer these questions, something called modularity was defined, which says how good the communities that you find are. The modularity looks at the number of connections within each cluster over the number of connections between the clusters. Initially, it was let's say, invented to investigate which of these levels is the best level of community detection. But then people thought, okay, I have this measure called community. Modularity. Why shouldn't I solve an optimization problem? I'm looking for the best modularity. Why shouldn't I define a maximization problem, which says dissect this network and come up with that dissect which gives you the highest modularity. This is called modularity optimization or maximization. Well, basically the problem that we have is it's an NP-hard problem. So there's no direct solution. The second problem that we have is in some networks it doesn't work if basically number of links, number of edges that you have is less than root of number of nodes. This method does not work. This is not the case for mature networks. But there are methods to answer that NP-hard, to solve that NP-hard problem. One of them was shown in the previous slide. Other ones you see here, there's a lot more to this. But basically this class of algorithms can answer that question. We tested different algorithms and we looked at them in terms of number of communities that gave us, how long it takes, how accurate they are, how stable are these. Because many of them are combinatorial optimization problems. Keep in mind, if you ever want to do community detection, you're working with unstable algorithms. You apply it once, you come up with these communities. You apply it the second time, you come up with slightly different communities. They're not completely stable. They're graph theoretic problems. So we decided which one is the best. That's a long story. I'm not getting there. But basically, the result was coming up with the communities in our network. And last week I talked about how, last month I talked about how we profiled these networks and came up with what are the shared interests. If you remember, that means a little bit of semantic analysis. What are those shared interests? So basically that's it. These are the results that I showed. We're done. These are the results that I showed last time. Hopefully by now it makes more sense how we drive each of these results. And if there is any question, maybe we can continue this outside the boardroom. Let's leave. Our social network, basically the social networks that we have, opposed to Facebook or Twitter or YouTube channels are a mix of popularity and technical issues. So it's not necessarily something becomes more popular because, okay, let me give you this example. Who is the most influential person in internet? Time magazine had this study just last week. Who do you guess is the highest influential alive in the internet right now?
Mark Zuckerberg.
I wish it was Mark Zuckerberg. Who else?
People, you're talking about people with a lot of
Yeah,
followers.
it's an actual person.
So I don't have
I just talked about influence. That's a bad question to ask.
Yeah, so I don't have Instagram, but currently there is a dude in Instagram who has like millions of followers.
What's the name of that dude?
Bilzerian? Dan?
No.
Dan Bilzerian?
That's what I said.
No, I think he has.
Who's Lady Gaga? I wish it was Lady Gaga. It's so unfortunate. It's so unfortunate that I wish it was Lady Gaga. Kanye West is the top influential person in internet, right? So when you think of our case, it's not necessarily that. At first I was shocked. I thought this is a wrong study, but then I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense. All the Kim Kardashian thing and Kanye West and things. All right, yeah, it makes sense. In our case, popularity does and does not influence our network. That's why our cases are worth to be studied separately as a separate school parallel to social network analysis that's happening in computer science, right? So it's sometimes you come up with these weird behavior, and the unfortunate part is because there's just 4 years of literature behind this. I'm unaware of any type of studies before we started that has studied this thing, and many weird things that you come up with, you cannot realize whether it's because we do not have a good history, we have not studied them for long enough, or it's because it's a separate type of phenomenon, and I need to pay let's say separate type of attention to it. But the general message that I can send is they are worth to be studied separately because there's something specific about these networks. One argument that I receive a lot is, okay, who says that it's only infrastructure that has this specific behavior? I might say, if you look at iPhone, for example, the same thing might happen, which I do not agree, because infrastructure is at the same time technical, at the same time broad, and at the same time narrow. It's kind of a weird thing, right? And it involves many different types of interest, but at the same time, the interests that are involved are limited. So it's not just people look at this from a specific point of view, but it's not like people looking at that from millions of different points of view. It's specific type of, let's say, buckets that people can be in when you look at these types of